All right, this thing working? Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks, Khaled. Thanks for the honors of giving the first talk at this new meetup. I hope there's room for improvement later on. Okay, so my name is Felix. I'm going to talk about the topic of adding dynamic content to static sites by using JSON files. I'm at FIU on Twitter if that's your thing. Um, Not working. By day, I'm a front-end developer at SumUp. We do mobile point of sale here in Berlin, which means you can take card payments with our card reader and your smartphone. We're also hiring that if you're looking for something. Yeah, topic, static sites. They're pretty great. They're fast, usually, unless you do something wrong. There's no, why are they fast? There's no templating that has to run on some server when you serve your site. It's all just there inside these static HTML files that can be piped to the browser. There's also no runtime usually that you need for some front-end JavaScript framework to fire up. And because of that, and because the content is all there, they're usually also very SEO friendly because every search engine will get what the user will get when they go to your site. They're easy to host too because it's just static sites. You can static files. You can put them anywhere really, any server that serves files via HTTP. There are more and more companies that allow you to host your stuff for free. So most people know GitHub Pages, right, which allows you to host static sites for free on GitHub. They also integrate with Jekyll, so you can automatically build your stuff. But there are also companies like Netlify or Zydeco that have static asset serving for very affordable or free conditions. Then static sites are also pretty secure because when there's no server that has to do something that receives weird requests, there's also less to hack for intruders, right? Because you're just serving files, you're not accessing databases or anything like that. Yeah, and finally, they often have a good developer experience because they usually come with a CLI that allows you to have a watch task running, which will update your site when you make changes, and you only have to refresh, or maybe you don't even have to refresh, depending on how modern your setup is and how modern your static site generator is. But, so there's of course a but. They're static, after all, right? They're static sites, and they're about as static as this rock. It's in the sea, it sits there, and don't get me wrong, you can do some things in JavaScript and CSS with your site. So you can do this with I hope you saw it, with the navigation in this case, where you change the navigation style depending on your scroll position on the page. So they look dynamic. You can do some stuff in CSS. And that video is not playing, of course. I assume that's CSS. Maybe it's something else. Didn't check. But where they're not dynamic is with the content, right? Your content is usually baked into those HTML files. So what does this look like? If you look at the brand new React documentation, which was created using Gatsby, a new static site generator, what they do to show you all posts, an index of all their blog posts, is they just render them on a page. No pagination, nothing. It's just all posts are there. I guess at some point there will be so many posts that maybe they won't do this anymore. I don't know. If you look at the website for Atom, at the documentation, you will see something that is the default for most static site generators. You have some index page, and at the bottom of the page, you have a bunch of pages listed and a next and a previous button that allows you to go from one static page to another. This is good for SEO, right? Because the search engine will actually see the links to other pages on your website and will be able to follow them and see like how your page is built up. But how do we handle this kind of stuff with the dynamic content or updating the content on the page in a more dynamic setup, a dynamic site. So a typical setup for these days is that you have a page that is either rendered on a server using some templating language, right? Well, that was also the case in the old days with like PHP or some other language that has templating. You can have a modern JavaScript front-end framework that also does server-side rendering, right, with React or something else. And then like you get rendered pages to the browser, and on the browser side, your front-end framework will kick in and will start doing its magic, and you get your dynamic part in the sense that you can then also do stuff in the front end. Yeah, and another thing that is very common nowadays is that your content actually comes from an API, right? We're here at Contentful, and you have a content API that lets you pull data from this API, which is your content for the page, and you can update your page live with that data. What that means though is, yeah, you can update, you have access to your content in the front end. And we have gotten used to this, right? As front-end developers, we are used to being able to fetch data on the fly through JavaScript and then update the page. Here's what this looks like on Instagram, for instance. You do a location search, and while you scroll, at some point you reach the bottom of the page. There's a load more button. You click it, new images load, and then they actually do that automatically after the first time because they figure, okay, this person is probably browsing our site. They don't care about our footer, and we're gonna scroll infinitely. How does this work technically? So usually you have some event that fires when the user reaches a certain point of the page. And when that happens, and to handle this, you can have something like a scroll listener, or better, as Stefan will tell you, you can do something with the new intersection observer API that allows you to put some element somewhere down on your page, and when it comes into the frame, you have the whole element intersecting with your viewport, and you can handle that and do something. And what do? You do an AJAX call with probably either with the native fetch or some HTTP client. You will fetch the data from the backend, and the backend will respond with the data. You parse the data, you get your content. Maybe you do some formatting, and then you basically create new DOM nodes, new DOM elements with your new content, and you insert them into the DOM. That's pretty cool. Now, but the problem is we're on a static site, that rock, and there is no API that we can use during build and during runtime, right? It's just gone. Now I have like a tiny project listing users. So I think like random images pulled from the internet using a JS library called Faker. And we'll try to do dynamic content updates. But how are we going to do this? So this is, by the way, this is not rocket science, if you haven't noticed already. You can find plugins for this a lot. But we start from scratch, so we have an idea. We can just inline all our data. This is great. We put all the data in the body of our, or in the HTML, in a script tag, and then our JavaScript can just like access that data whenever we need to update our content on the page, right? So this is in Jekyll how you would inline content that is coming from the Jekyll data into your head in this case, in the script tag. And yeah, let's see what that actually looks like. So where is my stuff? Not here, apparently. Okay. I should still have Jekyll running. Ooh. Okay. Okay, let's see. So this is a page that has this body this content in a script tag. You can see that when you go to the elements here in Chrome. This is the script tag at the top, and we have a global variable called users, and we also have some code that will update our site as we go. This is really naive. I wrote this afternoon, like parts of it. So you have like a handle load more function that will be assigned to the load more button. It will get the list of users on the page. It will count the number of users that are already in the page. Can you read this? I don't know. It will fetch, or it will look up more users from the global variable. We'll create new list items for you with those images, and we'll insert them into your list. And let's see how this works. So there you go. Good thing I had the Wi-Fi still in here. Oh no, wait, this doesn't matter. Haha, static site. No, actually, it does matter. So yeah, it works. We can load more, and once we get to the end of the list, the load more button should go away. Right now it doesn't, because I updated the script to something. You'll see why now. Hello. Because the question is, does this scale, right? And I already said in the beginning, I sounded a bit like, let's inline all the things. Does it scale? Let's look at our browser, the network tab. Ooh. In this case, you can see our index page has 1.5 megabytes, because these images are just like photo URLs and a name, and there are 10,000 of them. Because who knows, maybe you're actually showing your company products somewhere in there, and you have a lot of products and a lot of metadata on these products. So this doesn't scale, right? We need something smarter. What could that be? And in order to figure out how to solve this, we know APIs have solved it, right? We're dealing with APIs, we're doing it, and how have they solved it? They have solved it with pagination, right? You can paginate your data. That typically works like this. You make a request, and you get back a response, and the response data will have a property next that is the URL to the next bunch of data in your paginated set. And it will have a property previous that is the link to the previous set of data that you have in your paginated content. And you have this collection items, which basically contains all the individual entries, in our case, these users. There are some APIs that do this with headers or something like that, but the Contentful API, for instance, does it like this, more or less. And how can we do this in our static setup? How can we achieve something similar? Basically, we can just write JSON pages to our file system, right? We can create JSON files during the build, write them to the file system, for instance, in a folder /API. And then we could group them as well. So for our users, we can put all the user JSON files that we paginate in our code into API/users. And yeah, and then basically when we press the load more button, what we do is we download this next JSON file that we hopefully somehow linked by or are aware of by replicating the structure in the response or in the structure of these individual JSON files. So in the end, what we have there is a folder structure like this, right? So you have some index file, and then for each page you have another subfolder. I guess you can customize this, right? What does this look like? Okay, let's check out. All right, I think Jekyll is going to pick that up right away. Jekyll. Oh, I killed Jekyll. Too bad. Okay, you can see here, I'm using a plugin for Jekyll that does this now. Let's refresh. So again, we have a page, and the page has the load more button. We can press the load more button, and it will load the data. However, if we look at the network tab now, you can see that outside of these images, there are these requests for these index files, right? So we have the first index file that we downloaded, that is this one here, page 2 index. And then there's another one for page 3. And these files, when you look at them, they look like what I just described, right? You have a next link, a previous link, and you have your collection of users with your data. In code, the cool thing is, in order to switch to something like this, you don't actually have to do much. Basically, what I ended up doing was I switched the call and get next page, the logic that would look at the global users variable and extract something by slicing it or something like that, slicing the array. I just replaced that with an API call, in this case using Axios, and then I do the updates that I need down here in the success handler, with storing the next page URL somewhere in a global variable, and I'm getting the items from our response data. Yeah, and then we just do the same. We insert the new users into our list, and yeah, and if we reach the end of the collection, we're done, or we hide the button. Sorry. And this scales obviously because we have, with 10,000 files, 10,000 users, and 20 users per page, we get to, what is it, 50 files? I was better at math in the past. 5,000 files, sorry, should be 5,000. No, 50, 500, sorry. Don't do math while giving a presentation. Okay, cool. So, summing this up, we can do this with any static site generator, really. Usually, it comes down to finding a plugin. So for Jekyll, there is a plugin which I used here. For Hexo, apparently there is one. I think that's a JavaScript-based generator. Then for Metalsmith, I also found something that does this, another JavaScript one. And for any static site generator that supports plugins, you could write your own plugin, I guess. And yeah, at the top, if you have played with Gatsby recently, the whole reason why I came up with this talk idea was because I was playing with Gatsby and I wanted paginated stuff on my blog index. And then, like, when I prepared this talk, I realized Gatsby actually does this already for you by basically, Gatsby has this content or data model inside with GraphQL, and what it does is it creates a cache for you that is written to disk, and in that cache, in our example, every user would have its own JSON file. Obviously, then you end up making a lot of requests and so forth. So probably at some point there's like a trade-off where it makes more sense to download one file rather than downloading each user individually, right? But you basically don't need this with Gatsby because your React code that runs in the front end has access to this data. Yeah, and with this, I'm at the end of my talk. Thank you.
If you have a question, we should use the mic because we're recording. Okay, no question, I guess. So thank. Oh, sorry.
I will just ask you if you know some good examples that use static page. Some good examples that use static sites. Good. Some companies, for example, some startups maybe.
Oh, well, so why? We used to use a static site, right? We at SumUp, we had a static site. We still have it partially. For us, we were using Jekyll, and for us, it simply didn't scale far enough because we need 33 localized websites, and we need to be able to update only part of the code rather than running a full build. Maybe there is like a static site generator that is fast enough. Maybe Hugo is, maybe Gatsby would be, or you could have something that can store partial builds between deployments or something like that. But for us, this didn't scale. But for, I think, there are a lot of big brands that I think use static sites for their front end. If they aren't localized as much, or they just have different infrastructure that allows them to scale, or yeah, for us it didn't work particularly. But Contentful uses a static site, right? Yeah.
Maybe if they're enough scale. You had these 33 pages or sites, and before it did scale, where was the content hosted and who built and triggered the builds? So was there an editorial team or something?
Actually, I think like when we started out with this static site, Monica, my colleague, is here. She can jump in if I say anything that's not accurate. So before, it was really just like a bunch of product pages and that sort of stuff. And our marketing team would basically use a translation service called Web Translated, where all our translations were hosted. And then you had keys that were the translation keys that you could just insert into the templates. And then our build process would take care of this. Then we started moving to, and this was all manual, right? Manual build process, releases once a week or so, and relatively slow. Then we migrated over to Contentful because we wanted to put more content onto our marketing site, and we actually started playing with webhooks that Contentful offers, so that our build would run whenever someone changed content, but we weren't able to make it specific enough so that we would only build a specific localization of our website, for instance. So if someone changes the content for Austria, we don't need to update the United States, right? If it's really that different, the content that is being updated. And this meant for us that it basically didn't work with the webhooks. And what we're doing now is we're doing server-side React and use the webhooks to clear some cache that is shared between the nodes that we have.
Thanks.
But I think this highly also depends on your exact build setup. So if you have people that really know how to do continuous integration right, and you design your static site for this purpose that you often want to update, I think this is still possible. For instance, with Gatsby, I'm pretty sure you could do partial builds of your site based on the exact content that changed or something like that.
So not really another question, but an answer to the gentleman who just left. So the BBC certainly used to run all their main news sites statically, and that was a hard requirement because there was essentially no code allowed to run on the front end servers. I'm not sure what it's like now, and there were some interesting integrations when it came to integrating dynamic content, such as, for example, the market data. Using 404 handlers and other nasty tricks. For example, InfoPark has a content management system that is used to generate static sites. I don't know if they still do. Bundestag.de is run with that, and a bunch of large companies. So.
Cool, thanks.